Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my continuation of my book reading of Stephen King's Later. Here we go. Professor Briquette was so old school that he didn't have tea bags, just loose tea in a canister. While I waited for his hot pot to boil, he showed me where to find what he called a tea ball and instructed me on how much of the loose tea to put in. Brewing tea was an interesting process. I will always prefer coffee, but sometimes a pot of tea is just the thing, making it feel formal somehow. Professor Briquette told me the tea had to steep for 5 minutes in freshly boiled water. No more, no less. He set the timer, showed me where the cups were, and then stumped into the living room. I heard his sigh of relief when he sat down in his favorite chair. I made 2 cups of tea and put them on a tray along with a sugar bowl and half from the icebox, which neither of us used. Probably a good thing since it was a month past its sell by date. Professor Briquette took his black and smacked his lips over the first sip. Kudos, Jamie. Perfect on your first try. Thanks. I sugared mine up liberally. My mom would have screamed at that third heaping spoonful, but Professor Briquette never said boo. Now, tell me your tale. You got nothing but time. Do you believe me about the rings? Well, he said, I believe that you believe, and I know that the rings were found. They're in my bank's safety deposit box. Tell me, Jamie, if I asked your mother, would she corroborate your story? Yes, but please don't do that. I decided to talk to you because I don't want to talk to her. It would upset her. He sipped his tea with a hand that shook slightly, then put it down and looked at me, or maybe even into me. I can still see those bright blue eyes peering out from beneath his shaggy, every which way brows. Then talk to me. Convince me. Having rehearsed my story on my crosstown walk, I was able to keep it in a pretty straight line. I started with Robert Harrison, the Central Park man, and moved on to seeing Mrs. Briquette, then all the rest. It took quite a while. When I finished, my tea was down to just lukewarm, maybe even a little less, but I drank a bunch of it anyway, because my throat was dry. Professor Briquette considered, then said, Will you go into my bedroom, Jamie, and bring me my iPad? It's on the night table. His bedroom smelled sort of like Uncle Harry's room in a care home, plus some sharp aroma that I guessed was liniment for a strained hip. I got his iPad and brought it back. He didn't have an iPhone, just a landline telefungus that hung on the kitchen wall like something in an old movie, but he loved his pad. He opened it when I gave it to him. The start screen was a picture of a young couple in wedding outfits that I assumed was him and Mrs. Briquette, and started poking away at once. Are you looking up Theriot? He shook his head without looking up. You're Central Park man. You said you were in preschool when you saw him. Yes. So this would have been 2003, possibly 2004. Ah, here it is. He read, bent over the pad and occasionally brushing his hair out of his eyes. At last he looked up and said, You saw him lying there, dead, and also standing beside himself. Your mother would also confirm that. She knew I wasn't lying because I knew what the guy was wearing on top, even though that part of him was covered up. But I really don't want... Understood. I totally understood. Now concerning Regis, Thomas' last book, it was unwritten. Yeah, except for the first couple of chapters, I think. But your mother was able to glean enough details to write the rest of herself using you as her medium. I hadn't thought of myself as a medium, but in a way he was right. I guess like in The Conjuring, and of his puzzled expression. It's a movie, Mr. Bucket. Professor, do you think I'm crazy? I almost didn't care because the relief of getting it all out was so great. No, he said, but something, probably my expression of relief, caused him to raise a warning finger. This is not to say I believe your story, at least not without corroboration from your mother, which I have agreed not to ask for. But I will go this far. I don't necessarily disbelieve, mostly because of the rings, but also because that last Thomas book does indeed exist. Not that I've read it. He made a little face of that. You said your mother's friend, or ex-friend, could also corroborate the last and most colorful part of your story. Yes, but he raised his hand like he must have done 1,000 times the babbling students in class. You don't want me to speak to her either, and I quite understand. I only met her once and I didn't care for her. Did she really bring drugs into your home? I didn't see them myself, but if my mom said she did, she did. He put his pad aside and fondled his go-to cane, which had a big wide knob at the top. Then Tia is well rid of her. And this Terrell, who you see is haunting you, is he here now? No, but I looked around to be sure. You want to be rid of him, of course. Yes, but I don't know how to do it. He sipped his tea, brooding over the cup, then set it down and fixed me with those blue eyes again. He was old. They weren't. An interesting problem, especially for an elderly gentleman who's encountered all sorts of supernatural creatures in his reading life. The Gothics are full of them. Frankenstein's monster and Count Dracula being just the pair who showed up most frequently on movie marquees. There are many more in European literature and folk tales. Let's presume, at least for the moment, that this Terrell isn't just in your head. Let's presume he actually exists. I kept myself from processing that he did exist. The professor already knew what I believed. He said to himself, let's go a step further. Based on what you've told me about your other sightings of dead people, including my wife, all of them go away after a few days, disappear to... He waved his hand to wherever. But not this Terrell. He's still around. In fact, you think he may be getting stronger. Well, I'm pretty sure he is. If so, perhaps he's not really Kenneth Terrell at all anymore. Perhaps what remained of Terrell after death has been infested. That's the correct word, not possessed by a demon. He must have seen my expression because he hastened to add, we're just speculating here, Jamie. I'm going to speak frankly and say I think it's far more likely that you're suffering from a localized fake state that has caused hallucinations. In other words, crazy. At that point, I was still glad I told him, but his conclusion was maximo depressing. Even though I'd been more or less expecting it. He waved a hand. Bosh, I don't think that at all. You're obviously operating in the real world as well as ever. And I must admit your story is full of things that are hard to explain. In strictly rational terms. I don't doubt that you're accompanied Tia and her ex-friend to deceased Mr. Thomas' home. Nor do I doubt that Detective Dutton took you to Terrell's place of employment and his apartment building. If she did those things, I'm channeling the Larry Queen here, one of my favorite apostles of deduction. She must have believed in your mediumistic talents. Which in turn leads us back to Mr. Thomas' home, where Detective Dutton must have seen something to convince her of that in the first place. "You lost me," I said. "Never mind," he leaned forward. "All I'm saying is that although I lean towards the rational, the known, and the empiric, having never seen a ghost or had a flash of precognition, I must admit there are elements of your story I can't dismiss out of hand. So let us say that Theriot, or something nasty that has inhabited that remains of Theriot, actually exists. The question then becomes, can you get rid of him?" Now I was leaning forward, thinking of the book he'd given me, the one full of fairy tales that were really horror stories with very few happy endings. The stepsisters cut off their toes, the princess threw the frog against the wall, splat, and instead of kissing him, Red Riding Hood actually encouraged the big bad wolf to eat Grandma, so she could inherit Grandma's property. Can I? You read all those books. There must be a way in at least one of them, or a new idea struck me. Exorcism. What about that? Probably a non-starter, Professor Burkett said. I think a priest will be more apt to send you to a child psychiatrist than an exorcist. If your Theriot exists, Jimmy, you may be stuck with him. I stared at him with dismay, but maybe that's alright. Alright? How can it be alright? He lifted his cup, sipped, and set it down. Have you ever heard of the ritual of Chud? Now I'm 22, almost 23. In fact, I'm living in the land of later. I can vote, I can drive, I can buy booze and cigarettes, which I plan to quit soon. Understand that I'm still very young. And I'm sure that when I look back, I'll be amazed, hopefully not disgusted by how naive and wet behind the ears I was. Still, 22 is light years from 13. I know more now, but I believe less. Professor Burkett would never have been able to work the same magic on me now that he did back then. Not that I'm complaining. Kenneth Theriot, I don't know what he really was, so let's stick with that for now. Was trying to destroy my sanity. The professor's magic saved it. It may even save my life. Later, when I researched the subject for an anthropology paper in college, I discovered half of what he told me that day was actually true. The other half was bullshit. I have to give him credit for inventing, though. Check this out, and dig the irony. My Uncle Harry wasn't even 50, and totally gaga, while Martin Burkett, although in his 80s, could still be creative on the fly, and all in service of a troubled boy who turned up uninvited, bearing a casserole and a weird story. The ritual of Chud, the professor said, was practiced by a sect of Tibetan and Nepalese Buddhists. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correct, actually. They did it to achieve a sense of perfect nothingness and the resulting state of serenity and spiritual clarity. It was also considered useful in combating demons, both those in the mind and the supernatural ones who invaded from the outside. Which makes it perfect for you, Jamie, because it covers all the basics. You mean it can work even if Theriot's really not there? And I'm just crazy pants. He gave me a look combining reproach and impatience that he probably perfected in his teaching career. Stop talking and try listening if you don't mind. Sorry, I was on my second cup of tea and feeling wired. With the groundwork laid, Professor Burkett now moved into a land of make-believe. Not that I knew the difference. He said that Chud was especially useful when one of these high country Buddhists encountered a Yeti, also known as the Abdominal Snowman. Are those things real? I asked. At which your Theriot I can't see with any certainty, but also, as with you and your Mr. Theriot, I can see that the Tibetans believe they are. The professor went on to say that a person's unfortunate enough to meet a Yeti will be haunted by it for the rest of his life. Unless that was, I could be engaged and vested in the ritual of Chud, or bested in the ritual of Chud. If you're following this, you know that if bullshit was an event in the Olympics, the judges would have given Professor Burkett all 10s for that one. But I was only 13 and in a bad place. Which is to say, I swallowed it whole. If part of me had an idea of what Professor Burkett was up to, I can't really remember. I shut it down. You have to remember how desperate I was. The idea of being followed around by Kenneth Theriot, aka Thumper, for the rest of my life. Haunted by him. To use the professor's words, was the most horrible thing I could imagine. How does it work? I asked. You like this. It's like one of the uncensored fairy tales in the book I gave you. According to the stories, you and the demon bind yourself together by biting into each other's tongues. He said this with a certain relish, and I thought, like it? Why would I like it? Once this union has been accomplished, you and the demon have a battle of wills. This would occur telepathically, I assume, since it would be hard to talk while be engaged in mutual tongue biting. The first to withdraw loses all power over the winner. I stared at him, my mouth open. I had been raised to be polite, especially around my mother's clients and acquaintances, but I was too grossed out to consider the social niceties. If you think I'm going to, what? French kiss that guy? You're out of your mind. For one thing, he's dead. Did you not get that? Yes, Jamie, I believe I did. Besides, how would I even get him to do it? What would I see? Come on over here, Ken, honey, and slit me some tongue. Are you finished? Professor Burkett asked mildly, once again making me feel like the most clueless student in the class. I think the tongue-biting aspect is meant to be symbolic. The way chunks of Wonder Bread and the little thimbles of wine are meant to be symbolic of Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples. I didn't get that, not being much of a churchgoer, so I kept my mouth shut. Listen to me, Jamie. Listen very carefully. I listened as if my life depended on it because I thought it did. As I was preparing to leave, politeness has resurfaced and I didn't neglect to tell him thank you. The professor asked me if his wife had said anything else, besides of where the rings were, that was. By the time you're 13, I think you've forgotten most of the things that have happened to you when you were 6. I mean, that's more than half of your life ago. But I didn't have any trouble remembering that day. I could have told him how Mrs. Burkett threw shade about my green turkey, but figured that wouldn't interest him. He wanted to know if she said anything about him, not what she said to me. You were hugging your mom and you said you were going to burn her hair with your cigarette, and you did. Guess you quit smoking, huh? I allow myself 3 a day. I suppose I could have more. I'm not gonna be cut down in my youth, but 3 is all I seem to want. Did you see anything else? That you've been having lunch with some woman in a month or two. Her name might have been Debbie or Diane, something like that. Dolores? Was it Dolores Muggle one? He was looking at me with new eyes, and All at once, I wished we've had this part of our conversation to start with. It would have gone a long way towards establishing my credibility. It might have been. He shook his head. Mona always thought I had eyes for that woman. God knows why. She said something about rubbing sheep dip into her hands. Lanolin, he said, for her swollen joints. I'll be damned. There was one other thing too, about how you always miss the back loop on your pants. I think she said, "Who'll do that now?" My God, he said softly. Oh my God, Jamie. Oh, and she kissed you on the cheek. It was just a little kiss and years ago, but that sealed the deal. Because he also wanted to believe, I guess, if not in everything in her, in that kiss, that she had been there. I left while I was ahead. And with this, I'm gonna stop it here, guys, for this part of the book reading. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.